And actually, to kind of refresh everyone's memory, I was challenged by some atheists on a page that I was on to call in.
Fair enough.
And,
okay.
There was no specific topic. I just chose to ask Matt a question.
Okay.
And in that first conversation, which was in May, we had a discussion. Then it went down the path of slavery.
Okay.
Matt kind of took it down that path.
Okay.
Then afterwards, it kind of got a little bit intense, and he hung up on me. And then probably in June, I think it was actually Father's Day weekend, I called back, and you were actually co-hosting with Matt. And I don't know if you recall it or not.
Are you talking to me then, Tracy, right?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
So we kind of went down that path again, and I actually took us down that path this time because I was kind of wanting to explore it more.
Okay.
And unfortunately, we ran out of time because I was the last caller.
I understand.
The one thing that that Matt said in his commentary afterwards, in that particular one, he had commentaries in both of them afterwards.
Sure, I understand.
But the last one, he said something that I actually think destroyed his own argument. I don't know if he realized it. That's how I took it.
Okay.
He said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, he said that God was weak because he could command them not to kill someone, but he could not command them to not own a person.
Okay.
Based on the 10 Commandments. I think he brought up eating shellfish, said he was worried about eating shellfish, stuff like that.
I understand what you're saying, and I think that that's kind of a fair comment. I don't know if weak is the word, but yes, he would definitely make a point and has made the point in the past that it's interesting that God would take more of a priority for restricting diets, for example, than restricting human beings objectified into property. So I think that I understand what you're describing, and you don't have to like demonstrate it beyond that. I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, well, what I think how he destroyed his own argument was he said that God was too weak to say that, or to say thou shalt not own a person. I think he kind of moved the goalpost there by getting that specific. But he said that, but what I wanted to respond to is in the 10 Commandments, when it starts out in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy chapter 5, it starts out, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. That is the first commandment in the 10 Commandments. It's listed twice in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. What I can't understand is how he could conclude after reading that God would still need to say somewhere in those 10 Commandments, thou shalt not own a person. Because to me, that would...
Well, in Exodus, he gives all the rules for owning slaves. Come on here.
No, you're not understanding what let me phrase, you didn't get to quite finish what you were saying, but let me just say what I think you're saying, and you tell me if I'm wrong, okay?
Okay.
It sounds like what you're saying is that God says you don't have any other gods before me, and that for some reason you're taking that to mean that we shouldn't own slaves because we're setting ourselves up as a god?
No, it's the Israelites out of slavery part.
He's talking about the first commandment.
Yeah, in that first commandment, and the reason why I'm focusing on the commandments is that's what Matt was focusing on.
Right. No, I understand. So what is it that you were saying specifically, though, about what conflicts with that about slavery?
Well, when those commandments were given, it was just after God had brought the Israelites out of slavery.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the subject is the Israelites, right? And not anybody else.
They witnessed him punishing slaves, or they witnessed him punishing the Egyptians for not releasing them who were slaves. So, and then he says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the house of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Mm-hmm. He specifies slavery in that verse, you shall have no other gods before me. So what I can't understand is why, after reading that, you would still feel like God needed to say, thou shalt not own slaves.
Because in Exodus 20...
Right, there's a whole lot of rules that God provides for how to own and trade and barter. And he deals with how to beat, the level of beatings that you can give your slaves, what the rules are for Hebrew slaves versus non-Hebrew slaves. in God's law, right? There's more law than the Ten Commandments, right? There's like, isn't it like, I think, I want to say
he's yammering on, you know, and
there's a few books of law, right?
Yeah,
and
Moses is going up and down the mountain.
And didn't God put them into slavery? Like, wasn't that a punishment on the Jews?
Yes.
Yeah, so he put them into slavery.
The Jews, in Jeremiah 34, he punished the Jews for not freeing slaves as what happened with, and he reminded them that they were slaves in Egypt.
Right, but he gave them the parameters under which to run their slave trade. I mean, there's laws. The law of Moses includes slave laws, and that law was supposedly from God.
Well, yeah, I don't know if y'all quite understanding it. In the Ten Commandments was the first thing God gave them.
I guess what I'm saying is it's irrelevant because you have the books of law, right? The law of Moses was the law. When Jesus talked about the law and said that people should keep the law, he was talking about the law of Moses, right? And those are the books of the law, not just the Ten Commandments. Jesus said that the law was perfect, right? He called the law perfect. And the whole idea of Jesus being perfect was that supposedly he lived a perfect life according to the law. That was how Jesus was perfect. Mm-hmm. So the laws of the Hebrews in those books of law are supposedly perfect laws from God that Jesus promoted and said were good laws, and they include quite a lot of laws about how to own and beat and treat and your slaves. So there's these laws from God that are governing slave ownership. I don't know how you can not understand that would be God sanctioning slavery. When I went to church, we didn't even deny that. I mean, what we said was, well, he didn't tell you had to own slaves, but he didn't tell you that you couldn't. And he also told you that you could. He didn't say, you know what I mean? It was like he didn't just say he wasn't silent on it. He had a lot to say about slavery, and a lot of it was it's okay to own slaves.
Well, actually, he never said that. Matt's argument was that the Bible viewed slavery as moral. The last time we talked, it
would have to be if it's allowed under the law of God, right? I mean, if
it was allowed too, but Jesus specifically said God did not intend for people to get divorced.
Okay, so, you're changing the subject here. Jesus endorsed slavery too.
Then divorce was allowed under law, but Jesus specifically said that God did not like divorce.
Okay, well,
but he also said the law was perfect. I mean, I can't really, I guess, speak to inconsistencies in the Bible.
Is God like Trump, where he just sort of says something and doesn't mean it? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is the Ten Commandments were established first. That was the first.
Okay. Well, do the Ten Commandments apply to people who aren't Israelites?
It doesn't matter, because I'm just going to say right up front that the law, that God basically saying I'm a jealous God, you could have no other gods before me, is not a condemnation of slavery. I mean, you're taking it that way, but that's not what it says. And I don't know anywhere in the Bible where it's clarified to mean that.
He's reading the whole verse, not just the Cliff Notes version of it.
I could go through the Bible right now and list several verses where slavery was viewed immoral.
Well, then God's a fuck-up because he can't write anything clearly. Come on.
Wait a minute. Hold on. This is getting crazy.
I can start from Genesis and move to the rest.
Hang on just a moment. God gives in the law parameters for what is acceptable slavery.
Do you agree with that?
I will agree.
He allows slavery. I agree with that.
Yes, and I would agree that slavery run external to those parameters would fall outside the law and be wrong. It would be considered illegal under the laws of God. So there can be immoral versions of slavery if we look at the law as a moral law. So to say that the Bible says that slavery can be immoral doesn't demonstrate that God condemns slavery, or that he doesn't allow slavery, or that he thinks that slavery itself is immoral. He definitely sees a moral version of slavery and an immoral version of slavery if, in fact, that is the law of God. He sees some slavery is acceptable and moral, and other slavery he would say is not. If you beat your slave and kill them in the minute, then that's immoral. If you beat your slave and they die a couple days later, that's okay. That's acceptable slavery.
Well, actually, that's a death. Keep in mind, that's a death penalty if you beat your slave and kill them.
Yeah, if you kill them immediately.
You can be avenged.
Right, but if you beat them badly enough that they die after a couple days, that's acceptable, and there's no penalty because it says they are your property.
Your money, yeah.
Yeah, but that's not an instruction to beat people.
No, it's an instruction on what is an acceptable way to beat them.
Okay.
What do you mean?
So can
I mean
we,
that it's telling
can we
you
agree that God in the Bible did not say slavery is wrong, don't have slaves? Can we agree on that?
Actually, I'm not sure. I could go through several verses where he specifically condemned.
Okay, well, if you want to equivocate,
I just
you're
don't
not
understand how you can read books and books that instruct people on how to run slavery.
If God could have done that, then you know, if he had the capability of doing that, then perhaps he should have, right? Because slavery is wrong, and God didn't realize that.
But my question, here's another question. Martin Luther King Jr. and Frederick Douglass commonly used the Bible to argue against slavery. My question is, what are they seeing that you were not?
Well, there are volumes and volumes written from pastors who argued for slavery from the Bible as well.
Right.
The Bible is often, I mean, for an atheist, this is not a problem because I can just look at it and say the book is full of contradictions. For a theist, you're the one that has an issue here because you've got a bunch of people who are on the one side saying the Bible is definitely for slavery and this is why it's okay for us to own slaves. And then you have other people on the other side saying this same Bible definitely condemns slavery and it says it's not okay to own slaves. This is an internal Christian conflict that y'all have to resolve because when I look at it, I just see some verses contradicting other verses, but I can't ignore that there's an entire legal structure laid out that Jesus says is from God, the law of Moses, that tells people in what circumstances and how you can have slavery. I mean, there's no denying that.
Yeah.
I've never denied the Bible doesn't allow slavery. I've said it when I debate atheists.
But the law of God governs it, right?
Actually, in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10, it says the law was placed there because people are evil and immoral, and it actually. And
this is why Matt said God was weak. Right? He can't enforce this. He can make a law that says, you know, shrimp is wrong, don't eat a shellfish, but he couldn't say, you know, slavery is really evil. Like to God, it was more important to ban eating a shrimp than to ban treating people as property.
Or one could look at it like this: you could look at it like God, after the Israelites came out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. It should have been common sense not to own a slave. And
he put laws on the books.
Why couldn't God figure that out?
You seem to just want to ignore the fact that God found some slavery forms acceptable. That he thought that this was okay.
Y'all's position is there's different forms of slavery?
Well, no, the Bible has laws about it, which means the Bible's looking at different forms of slavery. When the Bible says you can't beat somebody to death right then and there, it's saying that's a form of slavery that's wrong. When it says you can beat somebody and if they die a couple days later, that's a form of slavery it's saying is acceptable. God is saying
that's not really uncommon even to modern laws because in the 13th Amendment, a person who was convicted of a crime was considered a slave.
This is just muddying the water.
Yeah, it is. We're talking about God here, right? And whether or not God is endorsing slavery. And my
point right quick, please.
Yeah.
The cops would carry nightsticks and do actually sometimes have to beat prisoners. So I don't really understand. That's one thing I think is a really weak argument for atheists, but it seems to be the number one argument for atheists.
No, it's
this
not.
Idea of slavery.
There's immorality all throughout the Bible.
You're talking about the difference between a state stripping a person of rights through due process because they have demonstrated some sort of harm to the state versus going into another country and just grabbing all the people, killing all the men, bringing all the women back and making them sex slaves. This is not apples to apples. When you're talking about You do strip people of right to sometimes life, liberty, and property when they have violated state laws. We have those codes on the book, and we do enforce laws, yes, in order to keep
and yes,
civil
there are
harmony.
mistakes being made there, but let's call them mistakes.
But the point is, the question
God
is,
made a mistake here too.
yeah, God allowed them to just go and enslave their neighbors, basically. Just go and get your neighbor and enslave them, and enslave each other. I mean, the idea is, should people be tradable commodities? Should people be property? Should we have, for example, people in prisons, but we don't allow sex trafficking, right? We understand that's wrong.
Do you admit that slavery is wrong?
Yes.
Okay, then you're more moral than your God.
I admit divorce is wrong too. Both of them are wrong. And
okay. Well, you're more moral than your God. So why do you need him?
Okay, so do you think that it's worse to eat a shrimp? Do you think it's worse to eat a shrimp than to treat people like property, beat them, treat them like sex slaves?
I think it's worse to beat them and treat them like sex slaves.
Okay, so if you were making the law, you would probably consider telling people not to own slaves as a priority over dietary restrictions. Is that?
No, because in Egypt, they probably would have eaten shrimp. So they would have probably been told, as far as witnessing God punish Egypt for not releasing them as slaves, I would have thought that was common sense.
It wasn't. It wasn't. And you would have been wrong because it wasn't. And so God gave them rules.
How immoral humans are.
Okay, I'm going to just say, we're not really getting anywhere. I agree with Don. Basically, your argument is that you look at the verses where you believe slavery is condemned, you think that the first commandment condemns slavery. My argument is that God laid out a whole bunch of rules for his version of acceptable slavery, and people can now take away the call and go and think about it and make their own decisions. Is that fair?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Good enough. Thank you for your call.
Thank you for calling.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye. All right.
All right.
Woo! All right, so let me see if I can see. We've got a few that have been here for a while. I want to make sure
let me throw something in. There's
go for it.
Fairly famous quote, and I'm sort of paraphrasing. Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War was basically confused because he heard arguments on both sides and said, how can a God be for something and against something? And he was a kind of enigmatic kind of guy, but I have to read into that maybe he was figuring out that, hey, this theism thing just doesn't make a damn bit of sense because you can't have for and against, for the same thing from this supreme power.
People who agreed with slavery looked at the Bible and said it agrees with me, and people who didn't agree with slavery looked at the Bible and said it agrees with me, and that is not an atheist issue to
you
sort.
look at the Jeff Davis quotes and all that,
Okay.